Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're going to find out if Fire and Ice is possibly Pauper Playable. Fire and Ice is a really exciting split card that was made Pauper legal when it was downshifted in Ultimate Masters. We were all very excited for this downshift, and some other lists have already 5-0'd with this spell, but I think it was Entropy263 aka Birbman who really made it shine in this list, Fire and Ice Control. Before I get into the deck tech, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Alright, let's have a look at Birbman's Fire and Ice Control. This deck is centered around removing all of your opponent's creatures, countering any spells you can't deal with, and probably eventually decking them while using your own counter spells to refill your library. We're going to need a ton of removal to achieve that goal, and our removal package starts with the namesake card Fire and Ice. Fire and Ice is a split card, so you can cast either of its halves at instant speed. The Fire half says Fire deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. This spell is obviously great for picking off 1 toughness creatures and things like Delver or Fairies or Elves. It's awesome for just killing those creatures, getting a 2-for-1 on its front side. However, if you're playing against something like Stompy and you just have to deal 2 damage to that Skargan Pitskull, Fire still gets the job done. The other half is Ice, which is equally as important and useful. It costs 1 and a blue to tap target permanent and draw a card. Ice is super versatile. It's going to let you tap a Tireless Tribe, a Gurmag Angler, or any threat your opponent has while you try to dig to an answer that can actually deal with their threats. Next, we have Hypothesizzle, another very recent downshift and fantastic card. It costs 3 blue-red for an instant and allows you to draw 2 cards. Then, you may discard a non-land card. When you do, Hypothesizzle deals 4 damage to target creature. While this can't remove a Gurmag Angler, that's okay. It can kill just about any other threat in the format. Hypothesizzle is also great because it represents card advantage at instant speed. That's fantastic for a deck that's always trying to draw into more removal and counter spells. We're also running 1 copy of Capsized, so if we have our mana developed, we can just bounce all of our opponent's permanents and deck them while they can't play anything. Capsized costs 1 blue, and it has a buyback 3, which means you may pay an additional 3 generic mana as you cast Capsize. If you do, you put Capsize back into your hand. As it resolves, it returns target permanent to its owner's hand. Finally, our last way to deal with onboard threats is one of the strongest removal spells in the format. It's Cred. It costs 1 red mana for an instant and deals damage to target creature equal to the number of snow permanents you control. A lot of decks are just running snow lands for the swag value, having really fancy lands in their deck, but this one is actually going to take advantage of them by using Cred to remove creatures with massive toughnesses like Gurmag Anglers. Next up is our package of counter magic that we're going to use to make sure our opponent can't stick enough threats to kill us before we deck them. That package starts with Dispel. We're also, of course, running the OG counter spell. It costs blue, and counters target spell. This is our catch-all answer to what our opponent is trying to do, so we've got to make sure we catch the right spells with our counter spell. Next up is Exclude, one of my favorite counter spells to resolve. It costs 2 and a blue for an instant to counter target creature spell and draw a card. This is a massive blowout, especially if your opponent's behind and they're just trying to stick a threat to close out the game. You exclude it, you put a card back into your hand so that you can deal with the next thing that they try to do. Finally, we have Devious Cover Up, which is our de facto win condition. Devious Cover Up costs 2 generic mana and 2 blue mana for an instant that counters target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. You may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. The fact that Devious Cover Up is in this list at all is a huge hint that we're going to be trying to deck our opponent. We have 2 copies of Devious Cover Up, so if we have no spells in our library, we just have to make sure to counter something, get another Devious Cover Up back in there, and keep looping them that way so that we never deck. The rest of the deck is full of card filtering and card advantage so that we can draw into all of our really powerful counter magic and removal. Our first piece of card advantage is one of the best butts in Pauper. It's Augur of Bolas. It costs 1 and a blue for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, put it into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. We're only running 6 spells in our deck that aren't instant and sorcery spells, so Augur of Bolas will almost always hit. It's going to be a little harder to win through damage, but that's okay. We're going to deck our opponents anyway. We're also running 2 copies of Brainstorm, one of the most difficult spells in Pauper to resolve correctly. Brainstorm costs 1 blue mana for an instant. It allows you to draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand back on top of your library in any order. order. While I'm a lot more used to seeing Brainstorm in decks that are trying to power out Delver of Secrets and flip it early, this is a great spell for this deck. If we can get a good couple of Brainstorm shuffles, we're going to accumulate so much card advantage and draw so many powerful spells that there's no way our opponent will be able to get ahead again. Next up is PreOrdained. Nice and simple, but a good bit of card filtering. It costs 1 blue mana for a sorcery that allows you to scry 2, then draw a card. Finally, we have Think Twice, which is even more great card advantage. It costs 1 and a blue for an instant and allows you to draw a card, and you can flash it back out of your graveyard for 2 and a blue. This is great going with our hypothesis, so we can always discard a Think Twice to it, deal 4 damage to something, and still get the card draw effect on the flashback. Finally, our last non-land cards are a very tight Archaeomancer Ghostly Flicker loot package. It starts with Archaeomancer, which costs 2 blue for a 1/2 human wizard, and when Archaeomancer enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. The spell we're ideally hitting with our Archaeomancers is Ghostly Flicker. It costs 2 and a blue for an instant and exiles 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then returns those cards to the battlefield under your control. As long as Archaeomancer is one of the creatures that's targeted, we can get instants and sorceries back out of our graveyard at will. So we're going to try to flicker both of the Archaeomancers here. That's right, we've only got 2, so we have to protect them somehow. We're going to try to flicker both of our Archaeomancers to get back all the instants and sorceries we've been casting throughout the game. All right, let's have a look at this mana base. First, we have 3 Ash Barrens and 4 Evolving Wilds as fetches to go along with our Brainstorms and also to fix our mana. Both of them allow you to search your library for basic land cards. Ash Barrens is going to put that card straight into your hand, while Evolving Wilds is going to put that land onto the battlefield tapped. The only other non-basic lands we're running are Izzet Boilerworks, your Karus in blue and red. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, you return a land you control to your hand. When they're untapped, you can tap them for blue and red. For our basics, we have 10 snow-covered islands and 2 snow-covered mountains, all snow-covered because we want to make sure we can power up our Cred, and lots of untapped lands so that we can start preordaining and think twicing right away. All right, let's have a look at this sideboard. As Izzet is known for, we have very powerful sideboard cards. First, we have 3 copies of Hydroblast for bringing in against those red decks. We have 4 copies of Pyroblast for bringing in against those blue decks. We have 2 copies of Electrickery for wrathing the board of X1s. We have 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus for controlling the graveyard of other graveyard-based decks. We have 2 Gorilla Shamans for blowing up all of Affinity's artifacts and even some of Boros Monarch's lands, and we have 2 copies of Serrated Arrows for dealing with even more X1s than Electrickery can. And there you have it, FireIce Control by Birbman. We're going to be taking this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince this Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Tuesday night playing Possibly Pauper Playable decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.